I mentioned Ukraine. You're closer to it now here. And I'm wondering, what are your views on what's happening with Ukraine and Russia? You see things from a completely different picture than most people see things, because you know a lot more what's going on inside, longer term visions, things from a geopolitical standpoint. What do you see when you see what's going on in Ukraine? And what do you think that most people don't see when they read the headlines and hear all of the scenarios? The latest thing was World War III was trending on Twitter a couple days ago. And I'm in chats with crypto people, and they're talking about the nuclear fallout and where it's going to go around the world. It's going to India, and people are planning for this. What do you make of it?
Yeah, being in Europe, being in the UK versus being in the United States, and while I am closer now physically, it still seems like in many ways the war is still very far from the everyday person's life. In the United States, we really don't feel the Ukraine conflict at all. The average American does not feel it at all. We have very little reliance on Russia for anything. We are, if anything, our economy is benefiting from Europe's sanctions against Russia, because now that creates a vacuum of resources in Europe, and the most logical person for them to turn to, or the most logical country for them to turn to for that vacuum of resources is the United States. So we have increased supply routes for liquid natural gas. We've got increased supply routes for shipping weapons. We've got more and more reliable, or more and more people depending on us in Europe than we did prior to the 24th of February.
Right.
So in the United States, it's the war in Ukraine is a very good thing for the United States. And I think that's something that most people are either glazing over or outright ignoring, that there is really nothing but net benefit every day that this conflict lasts for the United States.
I love how you just cut through and just say things like this, Andrew. I hadn't really thought of it that way, but like you said, it's so separated. I bet most people in America couldn't point out where it is on a map.
Yeah.
Right? And for them, it's so far over there, don't really know what's going on. No dependencies for natural gas, no real worries about Russia doing anything, no history of Russia ever coming through and wreaking havoc anywhere.
If anything, Russia and the United States were allies during World War II. And that's another thing that people are missing. Russia hasn't changed much. They were the same country that in World War II fought for the Allied powers with one gun for every 2 soldiers. They were heroes. At one time in world history, the Russians were heroes. They would literally put a guy with a gun, and behind him would be a guy with no gun, and the guy with no gun's job was to pick up the gun when the dude with the gun died. They are very skilled at wars of attrition. They are very patient. They are built of a different type of culture when it comes to protracted long-term conflicts, which is what Ukraine is. People keep thinking that Ukraine it's in multiple phases. When you look at conflicts, all what's known as interstate conflict between 2 sovereign nations, interstate conflict is protracted. Look at what the United States did when it invaded Afghanistan. Look at what the United States did when it invaded Iraq. Look what happened when Russia invaded Georgia. Look what happened when Russia invades Ukraine, right? Conflicts take a long time. The first strategy was kind of a shock and awe strategy. It didn't work. It didn't work not just to the Russian surprise, but to NATO's surprise and the United States' surprise. I'm pretty sure Zelensky was surprised. There was a lot of people surprised by, wow, we just resisted their assault on Kiev, or Kyiv as they want to call it now, because it's the Ukrainian, right? The Ukrainian name of it.
And why did that happen? Do we know?
Why did it fail?
Yeah.
Strategically, so Putin became very good at a certain model of conflict. It worked in Georgia, it worked in Crimea, 2008, 2014, where he basically corrupted senior officials from inside. So then when Russia announced that they were coming in, those senior officials would bow immediately, right? It was an administrative takeover, very similar to what China did in Hong Kong in 2019. When the administrators subjugate themselves, then nobody else has a say. They didn't have that network in place in Ukraine. So
and it's bigger, too.
It's bigger
than Crimea or Georgia.
Correct. It's much bigger. But you also have this history of Ukraine's application process to NATO and NATO's relationship with Ukraine. Whenever people call this an unprovoked war, it's flat out wrong. It is absolutely a provoked war. Ukraine has been applying to NATO. NATO's been dancing with Ukraine about joining. Russia's been very clear since 2011 that would be seen as a threat. Russia's been very clear for a long time that NATO expansion to the east is a non-starter for them, and they see it as an existential threat.
Right.
And they are technically correct that
it is, right?
Correct. They are technically correct that at the beginning of NATO agreed that it would not move further east than what was at the time the Soviet Union.
Right.
But with the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, now that changed the charter, right? So now, do they treat former Soviet states as Europe, or do they treat former Soviet states as the original terms? So it took them 6 years to decide. From 91 to 97 was this very confusing time where folks didn't know, like, what do we treat a former Soviet state as? And then Russia said, treat them as Soviet, and NATO said, well, we might see benefit if we see them as Europe.
Hey, it's Brian Rose, founder of the DeFi Academy. I've told you, my 4-week crypto bootcamp is amazing, but don't take my word for it. This is what my students are saying.
The DeFi Academy was an amazing experience for me. It took me totally out of my comfort zone.
In this course, I was challenged, I was held accountable, and pushed to do things that honestly weren't always easy.
It's been phenomenal, and I can't believe we're already up on our 4 weeks. It has flown by.
Going through this DeFi accelerator by far was one of the best courses I've taken.
You do this course, you really get into the nitty-gritty of the activities that will make you comfortable with decentralized finance.
Thank you so much to Brian and everyone at London Real and the DeFi Academy for even putting together an amazing course like this.
Anybody else that wants to do it, please sign up. It is well worth the money.